let's see how this goes. I am getting over the flu. All three of us got the flu, and it took us, oh God, I mean, it's been over a week. Cece still has a terrible cough that she can't get rid of. Chad still feels under the weather. I still feel under the weather. I don't know if you can tell, I'm still pretty kind of congested. So it's been a week. And that would be fine, except that everything has to kind of stop when you're sick, and it can be hard as well when you have a kid. So we kind of got it in a domino effect. So Cece got sick first, then she got over it, and then so Cece got sick first, then Chad a couple of days later, then me like a day after Chad. So we were all sort of dealing with that, and there was one day where I was taking care of Cece and I was taking care of Chad, and I was not feeling 100%. And then the next day I just was like, I'm done, I have to be in bed, I can't do anymore. Fortunately, Chad was beginning to feel better by that point, so we tag teamed it. But it's been hard, and it's the little things that are hard about it. So you can't keep the house tidy or clean because nobody has the energy to do that stuff. Cooking became a real pain because none of us wanted to cook or deal with the dishes, so you're not really eating that well. And all of our friends were so nice to say, well, can we do anything? And part of me just wanted to say, can you cook us a really nice meal? But you don't want to impose on people, or say, can you come and clean our house? They mean things like, can we go and get you some medicine or whatever, which when you have the flu, there isn't a lot you can take anyway. So we're finally kind of out of that, but it's not a case of, oh, I woke up and feel 100 times better. I feel like 50% better, and it's sort of 10% increments every day. One of the nice things of being at home was that all of us were at home, so that was quite nice. I did love being at home the whole week with Chad and Cece, and also the pets. There were some nice things about it, and I watched a ton of TV. I read a really great book. I will talk about that. With regards to Open Coven, I really need to work on putting together the new cat planter kits. I'm waiting for the embroidery floss to arrive for that. So when that arrives, I'll be able to put the kits together. Also working on the spell kits. That's going incredibly slowly because there's a few new aspects to those kits that the standard embroidery kits don't have. And so, for example, the packaging is going to be different, and there's going to be more instructions because there'll be a ritual with it. There's also going to be some ritual items. So sourcing all of those things and putting them together and figuring out how to package it all is going to take some time. The thing that I am working on it right now that is time sensitive is the Magical Fiber Arts course that I am teaching online for Cherry Hill Seminary. And if you haven't heard about this on my social media stuff, I will do a little shameless plug right here. Now that we're all kind of over this flu virus thing, one of the things I need to do is finish my Magical Fiber Arts course. And by that I mean all the materials and things. This course is going to be a great experience, and I'm really excited about it. But before I talk about that, let's talk a little bit about what Magical Fiber Arts is or are. Many years ago, when I started to really amp up my magical practice and sort of reclaim my witchcraft identity, I eventually discovered that being creative and making stuff was really helpful in giving me an opportunity to open up those channels and access my intuition and the divine. When I started, I did a lot of art journaling and mixed media stuff, really just stuff for myself. It wasn't anything I was displaying necessarily. I taught a few classes about doing this. We did automatic drawing, collage, printing, and so on. And if you are interested in that, I do have a magical art journaling course on my website that you can access. The link is in the description. But as time went along, I started to change my practice. Over the last couple of years, what I felt was that fiber arts was an ideal opportunity for me to combine lots of things that I loved in a really great package. So I love sewing, hand sewing, and I love to create pieces that I can use in my own ritual work. Additionally, I found that the act of sewing was incredibly meditative and put me in a very unique space, both mentally and spiritually. And so I started to develop a process of manifesting and developing my intuition through sewing. You can do this in so many different ways, and that's another thing that's so appealing to me. So for example, these pieces behind me are kind of wall hangings that I have in my office. And I love them because I made them, which makes me feel quite pleased, but they were really important spiritually to me. These are kind of moon ones, and these are a little bit more kind of floral. Also, you can make much smaller pieces, and I've done a lot of those. What I love about the smaller pieces is they're much quicker to make, and you can experiment in lots of different ways. And when I say small, I'm talking about this sort of size, no more than 3 or 4 inches. In making these, I could explore lots of different aspects of spirituality. I could also create things for people in my life in a very quick way. So, for example, several years ago, I had someone approach me and say, look, I'm going through a health crisis and I'm really frightened. I don't know how to approach what's going to happen to me. Is there anything you can recommend? And they were back in the UK and I'm here in the US. So I created a little care package for them. And part of the care package was a talisman that I'd made for them that I said, you know, keep hold of this just so that you're reminded that someone out there loves you and has got your back. But also spiritually, you might find it useful. In response, they said it was a really helpful thing to feel that they had this thing they could focus on, this sort of pictorial representation. It's fabric, and they loved the fact that they could put it in their pocket, they could carry it with them really easily. The great thing about fabric is it's so forgiving. If you kind of fold it up and put it away, or if you wear it, it's not going to deteriorate over time like paper might. And so for some things, it's a very useful magical or spiritual tool. In addition to these smaller pieces, I also like to make altar cloths, tarot cloths, charm bags, and in making them, they kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone in that they are in themselves a magical practice. The creating of them is a magical practice, but then ultimately they are a tool I can then use in my own ritual work. Therefore, I decided to create some materials and classes around this, and Cherry Hill Seminary, which is an online pagan school, is now going to host one of those classes, and I'm going to teach it for them. So in this 4-week class, people who participate will get to do 3 different projects. We will be meeting via Zoom, live online, every week for 4 weeks. And when we meet on Zoom, we will start the projects, we will create a sacred space, we'll work on our projects, and then the next week we can show the progress that we've made. And the 3 projects we'll be doing are magic talismans, charm bags, and altar cloths. So each week we'll get to do a different project. The process of sewing is incredibly accessible whether you've never done it before or you've done it a whole bunch of times. I tend to do a slow stitching technique. Sometimes I call it expressive fiber arts. Expressive fiber art or slow stitching is a different kind of project in that you don't necessarily know how it's going to look when you're done. You make a series of choices in terms of what stitches to use, the colours, the fabrics. And when you make those decisions, you create an incredibly unique piece. And also looks amazing. And so I love this practice because it's very freeing for people who've always felt like, I don't know how to embroider, I don't know how to hand sew. It doesn't matter. Your fingerprint will be on it, and that's the most important thing. Over the last couple of years, I've taught people sewing in lots of different environments, and beginners and more experienced alike have been able to create something that's of great value to them, and that's extraordinarily empowering. So if you're interested in this course that goes on for 4 weeks, it's $85 for the 4 weeks. It starts on February 10th. Our first online session is February 10th. You will be granted access to an online course through Cherry Hill Seminary, access to me, if that's something you really care about, and access to a bunch of resources on using stitches for magical purposes, deciding on what colours to use. We really do explore all of these things. And I really hope you consider joining us, because I think that it's going to be an incredible experience. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to give you a little bit of the down low on the book I'm reading, which is Traditional Witchcraft, a Cornish Book of Ways by Gemma, and this is what the copy I have looks like. It's a book I've been interested in reading for quite a long time, and Gemma Gary's books are quite hard to find in the US. She's not so popular. Her work is very regional, specific to the Cornish region, and so that might be why. It's from Troy Books, and Troy Books is a great occult publishing company based in the UK. I found out about Gemma Gary actually through an American witch friend of mine, Becky Bayer. If you don't know who Becky Bayer is, I urge you to reach out and look at her stuff on Blood and Spice Bush, and she also has written 2 incredible books. I did some classes with Becky several years ago, and she was the one that introduced me to traditional witchcraft, which is a aspect of witchcraft I had not really heard about. And it's so funny because it originated in the UK, but it didn't get as much interest as the Gerald Gardner / Doreen Valiente version of witchcraft, which is often considered Wicca. So when I was growing up, it was really hard to find books on witchcraft generally. That's how old I am. There wasn't the internet then. So Wicca definitely dominated the book scene back then, especially in regional England, which is where I was. Robert Cochrane, who was the proponent of traditional witchcraft mostly, was, I think, a contemporary of Gerald Gardner. They may have even met. And his type of witchcraft was a little different because it was less ceremonial. I would say it was more low magic based. And if you're interested in the difference between high and low magic, there's lots of resources out there. But what I'm essentially going to say is high magic is ceremony, lots of tools, lots of formality. Low magic is more kind of working within the landscape that you are in with the tools that you have available. And for me, this kind of witchcraft has always been more interesting and has informed my work as a witch, but also as a magical fibre artist, because fibre arts to me are about accessibility and using what you have to weave magic. So this book is great because she really talks about the historical context of folk magic, witchcraft in Cornwall. And I'm also going to say that a lot of what she talks about is true of lots of regions of the UK and probably parts of Europe too. Personally, it's important to me that my witchcraft is based in my cultural identity, and my cultural identity is European, obviously from my accent, but also you can tell from my skin colour. I'm not a fan of cultural appropriation, and I also feel like looking at a specific historical tradition as much as you can is really important because you have a much stronger practice. That said, there are some things that overlap, right? So there are definitely things that come up in lots of different indigenous spiritualities and practices all over the world. One of them being the idea of a horned deity or a horned being that is somehow magical. And as you can see, there is this goat figure that Gemma, that Gary discusses in the book. I called her Gemma then. That's because I like her so much. I feel like she's my friend. Anyway, why do I love this book? Okay, it has really great illustrations done by the author that are very, very cool. What else I like about this is her discussions of witchcraft, to me, are really fresh and exciting. She talks about the historical tradition of these practices and how it was most likely done back in the day, you know, back in the old days, whenever that you consider that to be. But what I also love is her descriptions of deity and the divine as a non-gender specific being was really exciting to me. I loved that. The other thing I like about it is it took, for me, as someone who's got a life, like we all do, often books on witchcraft and pagan practices can be quite elaborate. I've even looked at traditional witchcraft books where they're really elaborate, and I find it overwhelming, and also it makes me a little bit annoyed because I'm wondering who these books are for. They don't feel like they're for me, someone who's in her 40s with a job and family and all the other things that I always go on about. I feel like they're for people who literally are just dedicating their life to practicing witchcraft. A lot of us don't do that. And in fact, I'm going to say traditionally, witches and cunning people didn't do that. They had lives too, and they were fitting in these practices along with all the other things they had to do. Because just living a life when you didn't have technologies that we have now was an all-consuming day-long thing. So the idea that wise people or cunning people or witches were going and doing these elaborate ceremonies all the time is just not likely. And she addresses that a little bit in here, and I like that. That her witchcraft is really based in a practical understanding of people's lives, and I don't think she's done that consciously. I think it just happens to be part of this practice, that it's about using what you have. Also, if you are a beginner, this is a good book to get. It's not going to give you lots of explanations of the history of witchcraft or belief systems. What it gives you is a practical guide and a description of a way of approaching the natural world and the landscape, wherever you are. I have read a lot of witchcraft books over the years, and I will say that at the moment, the literary witchcraft scene is dominated by DIY books, and that's perfectly understandable, because that's the first question I always get asked, right? When people go, I want to be a witch, what do I do now? It's natural to want to kind of get started. And so there's a lot of DIY books out there. So how do you build an altar? You know, what are the seasons and stuff? But what we've lost with that, in my opinion, is a sense of literary voice. These books are often, I think, quite dry to read. They're often maybe ones I dip into for reference. So when you have books that are a little bit kind of not so inspiring to read, you don't really feel inspired in your practice. So I love this book because it is beautifully written. She writes in a very accessible, approachable way, but it also has an air of mystery. She really has a wonderful literary voice around occultism that I recommend. Another couple of people I would suggest that do have that kind of a voice, Doreen Valiente. She is just an incredible writer, or she was. But I also love Becky Bayer, who got me keyed into Gemma Gary. Becky Bayer has an excellent voice, really great imagery involved in her work. And then I also love the work of Mara Starling. Mara Starling writes about Welsh witchcraft, and her stuff really parallels this kind of book, because she talks about the traditions of a region. So not only do these books would be a great group to start with, they also have a readability around them that a lot of witchcraft books, I think, don't have. So definitely check out this book. I'm going to put a link to it in the description. And I'm also going to put a link to Mara Starling's YouTube channel and Becky Bayer's stuff too, so that you can find them. Definitely, if you are interested in witchcraft and you've seen a lot of stuff about Wicca and you felt overwhelmed by the amount of paraphernalia and tools and things you had to do, look at these, because I think they're deeply empowering, and they create, I think, a sense of magical autonomy that is incredibly exciting.